my wife's bringing me home dinner tonight, and so I thought I should sit with her and eat at 6. So we're doing the takeout Wednesday, I think it is. I thought it was takeout Tuesday, but my wife said it's takeout Wednesday. So I'm going to do the John 5. So why don't we open in prayer? We thank you, Father, for this time to learn your word, to learn about you. We ask you to help us to understand, open our eyes and our ears. In Jesus' name, amen. Anyways, so I'm going to do this now, and anyone can watch this after. It'll be on here at 6. Please feel free to ask questions, write comments. Remember that if you would like to join us on Friday at 7 p.m., we are going to have our Zoom meeting where we talk about this scripture and talk about other things we might want to discuss on the theological world. So here we go. So we're now dealing with the famous healing of the man by the pools of Bethsaida. By the way, there's about 4 different names that we found in antiquity for these pools, but most seem to like the name Bethsaida. So after this, there was a feast of the Jews. It's interesting that there's obviously a holiday going on, but John doesn't want to emphasize it at this point. He's happy to tell you if it's Passover or whatever, what he wants to, but obviously this is not the point. Sometimes he will tell you the feast because the feast makes a point to his theological point, but right now that's not the issue. Jesus goes up from Jerusalem, from Galilee. He's just healed the leader's son, and there was a sheep by the Sheep's Gate pool in Aramaic. There was a pool called Bethsaida. Now it's interesting, and this is where archaeology can never solve our issues. There was a time, actually quite a long time in the modern world, where people questioned whether this existed and whether this was just a Johannine, which means a John's, that's a word they use, Johannine interpretation or addition, because they hadn't found it. But guess what? They found it since. So always remember, just because something hasn't been found in archaeology doesn't mean it isn't there. I've heard arguments about, the Exodus from archaeology and all these other things. And these things are really complex. And, we think we know, and we don't. We just don't do the work anyway. I'm eating because I just should stop eating because I'm here. But I'm hungry. Anyways. In these laid a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. That's his point. These are people who cannot move around. One man was there, and he had been an invalid for 38 years. Now, with Numbers and John, there's always that issue of, does this mean something? The only thing this might mean, and there is debate, and by the way, if there's a lot of debate on an issue, it means we don't know what we're talking about. The more the ink is spilled, the more you realize there's ignorance. The reality is we don't know why John puts us in. There was an argument to be made that this is emphasizing the 38 years of them in the wilderness. They were in 40, but the first year in the wilderness, they were coming out of Egypt. The last year, they were going to go into the promised land. Is that what's going on? I don't know. I don't think so. There's no other references to the Exodus here. So maybe he just was an invalid for 38 years. The point being is this dude has been sitting around for a long time. When Jesus was online there, and he knew that he had already been there for a long time. Now, how does he know? There's an argument to be made that Jesus went around and asked people. In John's gospel, it's more likely he has foreknowledge. That seems to be when he runs into Nicodemus, Philip, underneath the tree. He sees him, and the woman at the well, he tells her about her life story. He's a revealer, so he knows they've been there a long time. He said to the man, "Do you want to be healed?" What a strange thing to say. To a man who's been sitting there, you are aware that he's been sitting by this pool for 38 years. Now, I have to say that I skipped something because the interpreter skipped, and you're going to notice this. There's no verse 4. What's going on there? Well, verse 4 was a later addition, and people get very upset about things like this. I have no idea why, but in the later, less trustworthy scrolls, it is added that an angel comes down to the pool and stirs the pool so that they believe that the first one in the pool will get healed after the water is stirred. We don't, they don't put this in most interpretations because it's not there, but that's why there's no verse 4, just so you know. Anyways, Jesus is sitting there. Do you want to be healed to this man? Do you want to be healed? What is going on there? Well, give us a sec. Now, the first thing that I actually read interpreters, and they just, every time Jesus says something, he's saying something deeper. When he talks to Nicodemus, he talks about being born again. Nicodemus' mistake is to take it as literally going in the womb. The woman at the well, I have living water. You don't have anything to pick the water up with, right? Why is he saying this? Do you want to be well? Obviously, he has a different point to be made. So, Jesus says, then the sick man answers him, just like Nicodemus says, do you have to be born again out of the womb? How does that happen? Or the woman at the well, you have nothing to take the water out of the well? He says a very earthly interpretation of what's going on here. The sick man answered him, Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. Okay? So that's where they added in the interpretation 4 to help people. It may have been true that was the mythology in first century Second Temple Israel, that when this water stirred up, there was a magical healing. But we don't know. Anyways, and while I am going down the steps, where am I? And while I am going, another steps down before me. So this gentleman has no friends. Has no friends. He's got no one to help him. That's interesting. 38 years, and he has no family or friends to join him. So that makes for an interesting experience. Jesus said to him, get up, take up your bed and walk. Well, that's interesting. There is no need for this magical pool with Jesus. Jesus is triumphant over all mystical superstition and other stuff because he's a creator God. At once the man was healed and he took up his bed and walked. Now, this is when the scary music should start if you understand first century Second Temple Israel. And you have to understand that the Israelites had very defined rules around circumcision, food laws, and especially the Sabbath. And why they held those so dearly is because those were markers that kept them, obviously they believed God showed them that through the Torah, but also by the first century, they are also markers that showed who was a good Jew and a bad Jew, or a good Jew from a Gentile, which was really important. They hated the Gentiles, okay? So they had this rules for everything, and Sabbath was a huge one. And they had 38 things that they had all agreed with, some they didn't agree with, but 38 things that you couldn't do on the Sabbath. Now, the question was, all the way from some people who held that all you had to do was do your normal job on the Sabbath, to very strict rules about not picking up a rock on the Sabbath, not moving anything, not getting out of bed. And one of the ones they agreed to is you were not to pick something up and carry it to another location on the Sabbath. So when Jesus tells him to get up and take his mat and walk, what he would be saying to the mentality of the first century Second Temple Jew is, I'm not a good Jew. I'm rebellious. I'm against the faith even, especially to those in power. Remember, this world, religion and church and state are together. There's no split in those things. So to be rebellious against the faith was to be rebellious against the nation. All right? So in verse 5, it says, now the day was, where am I here? Verse 9b. Now the day was the Sabbath. And that's, and everyone's, You know, that's the gasp you have if you were from that culture. So the Jews said to the man who had been healed, "It is the Sabbath." Now, notice what religion does. It doesn't put faith in healing or new creation or life first. It puts the rules first. And by the way, I've run into people, even in the last year, who are convinced that their interpretation of Sabbath makes them better than other people because they are observing this particular, and I would argue, very bad theological view on the Sabbath. And what's interesting is as I'm watching them, they're so convinced by their view of Sabbaton, or Sabbath, that they are dehumanizing other people. They are. They're arrogant. They think they have it figured out. And what I see is just sadness because these people are just as bound as these Pharisees. So he answers the man so they come to him and say, "It is not lawful for you to take up your bed." Isn't that interesting? Think about this for a second. A guy's been, let's say in our world, we went down and I was able to walk into a hospital or something and I had this kind of power. I don't. And I said to a COVID patient on a respirator, "Be well." And the police came in and said, "You're not doing social distancing," but the person pops out of bed. That's kind of what's going on here. There's this social expectation that they can't get over to see the life. It's a fascinating thing. So they asked him, "Who is this man who said you take up the bed and walk?" So now the issue is not this poor, pathetic person who in their world would be cursed. You were cursed if you were lame or blind. God had no time for you. And so they're not looking for him. They're looking for the bad guy. Who in the world would let you do this? Not looking for the healer. And that's always the problem in all of the Gospels is they're looking at their own power system and trying to protect that rather than looking to the one who wants to renew all things. And boy, can we relate to that today, eh? So now the man who had been healed did not know who it was. Now that's interesting. He gets healed. Now we're playing this always off chapter 9. We'll get there in John because they're mirrored healing stories with different results. He doesn't have the time of day to come to the person who healed him and find out who he was. Now think about that for a sec. Somebody has healed you from sin in their world. That's healed you from your disease or your calamity, and you don't even go up and say, "Hey, who are you?" You don't even ask his name. You don't follow him. See, this is just like the story Jesus tells of the 10 lepers and the 9 who go away and 1 comes back and thanks. The point being is this man who is healed was asked, "Do you want to be well?" Because there's a problem with him. That's what Jesus is trying to get to. And it's far greater than the physical calamity, right? Afterwards, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you are well. Behold, look what's happened to you. Look what I've done. Open your eyes." In other words, he's blind. There's no observational skills in this gentleman. He says, "See, you are well." And then he says, "Sin no more, that nothing worse can happen to you." Now, we don't like that verse in our culture. We are a therapeutic culture that likes psychoanalysis, and we believe that bad things happen because of our chance or our bad way of thinking. But Jesus isn't going to let us off the hook like that. He believes that, and it's true, by the way, that human action sometimes leads to consequences. And that's just a reality. And some of those human actions are because we are choosing to be outside of God's call for us to be truly human, treat each other well, treat each other like human beings. Now, we don't know what he's done. But there's a correlation with Jesus between what he did and his illness. Now, be careful, because immediately as soon as you say that, you're going to have Job's friends who are going to come around the sick person and say, "You're sick because you've done something wrong." That is not John's gospel. By chapter 9, he makes it very clear when he runs into the blind man. And John makes a point of this because they say, the disciples see the blind man, they say, who sinned, him or his parents? Because, you know, generational sin. And Jesus says, you don't know what you're talking about. This isn't about that. So in other words, Jesus recognizes there is calamities that fall upon people, and the Bible does, that is not a direct result of a personal action. Having said that, the Bible is very clear that there are consequences for personal actions. I just read a John Hopkins study. I'm going to share this on Sunday. And this is John Hopkins. Like, this is like top level medical school, right? And it said, and I quote, forgiveness is the best way to be healed. Like, that's like the title of this, or something like that. And you go into the article, it has nothing to do with Christianity or faith. It says that they have done studies, and that bitterness is one of the #1 reasons for long-term ailments, especially immune disorders and heart disease. And I don't know, I mean, there's studies there you can look at it. John Hopkins says this is the best way to get better. Now, obviously, what Jesus is saying here is the reality. And what is Jesus saying? Forgive your neighbor, forgive your enemy. Why? Because he's against us? See, this is the problem with most people's view of God. That God is the big, bad boogeyman in the sky who wants to take away all our fun. And nothing could be further from the truth. Nothing could even be close. The God of the Gospels is interested in life transformation for the goodness of humanity. He doesn't want us to follow Sabbath because it's a rule that makes him happy, and if you don't do it, you're not a good Christian. In fact, he says the Sabbath was created for man, not man for the Sabbath. In other words, God creates these things like rest because we need it. And he emphasizes these things because it's important to him that we live abundant life. And so when you run into these theological morons, and I'm sorry, that sounds harsh, but you run into these people who present God as a, I liken it to an angry English schoolmaster whose only emphasis in life is that you do right. That's not the God of the gospel. The God of the gospel is revealed in Jesus Christ. He comes around the broken and the weak. But he also knows that we have an opportunity to be made well through an abundant life looking like him. So when he asked the man at the pool of Bethsaida, do you want to be well? What he's really saying is, your calamity is evidence of something that happened to you. My suspicion, because of the way this man goes to the Jews, is perhaps, and by the way, this is just speculative theology here, perhaps the man was a zealot and he had been injured in a revolt against the Romans, and that's why he's lame, but we don't know. Anyways, when Jesus says to him, see, you are well, behold, you're well, look at how you are physically, go and sin no more. What he wants is this man to live the healing that Jesus offers. And so many people want to be made better, but they don't want to be made whole. And I know that that's not profound. I'm sure you all thought about that, but I heard a story one time. I don't want to use up much time. I try and not do too much on you, but I remember a story a pastor told me. He was down in Daryl Johnson, it was actually, and he was down in Pasadena or somewhere, and he had a parishioner in this big church he was pastoring, and she was chronically ill, and the family was just being driven nuts, and then finally it got to the point where they just went to the doctor and said, we can't deal with this woman anymore. I mean, she just needs us. And the doctor was very wise, and he said, okay, I'm going to do something to show you that she's using it. And he ended up calling the woman and saying, I have a shot here that I can instantly make you better. Instantly, right? Just come down to the office. I'll see you tomorrow at 10. And the lady said, okay, I'll be there. And then at 9 that morning, morning, she called and said, "Oh, I can't make it. I have this." Well, okay, we'll set up the appointment for the next day. And the family was in on all this. In the end, she never went because she didn't want to be made well. She didn't want to be whole because she had learned to live with this as her identity. It's an amazing story. I think of COVID-19. We all want to get those, get the antibodies, and we want to get the vaccine. And that's great. But Jesus would probably say to us, do you want to be well? Do you want to be whole? And maybe this is making us question, were we really happy? I mean, I've been thinking, if you're unhappy before COVID-19, you're going to be unhappy after COVID-19. If you're living a life of debauchery before COVID-19, all the vaccine is going to do is give you more time to do that. And so when Jesus asked him, do you want to be well and sin no more, so nothing worse will come, don't think of this as an angry God. I'm sorry, but think of this as a physician who looks at you after you've had your heart, I don't know, your heart transplant or whatever, and says to you, stop eating cholesterol. Stop living the life you're living, because now look, we've got this new heart. Anyways, the man does not come off as a hero. This is not a healing story with a happy ending, which also shows us that God rains his grace on the good and the bad. The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had healed him. So now he knows his name. Now that Jesus has confronted him with his life, now all of a sudden he recognizes Jesus. Notice he didn't before. And that's funny, because God will do stuff in people's lives and then they'll get mad at God. And then they have all kinds of real good opinions about it. Most atheists I've run into are pathetic. I'm being honest. But there are some that are thoughtful and I disagree with, and I don't think they have good arguments. But hey, I'm preaching a resurrected Messiah, so they probably think the same of me. But having said that, most of them are like children who are angry at a parent. I'm talking about the radical atheists. I'm not talking about somebody who's like, oh, I don't know. And it's interesting how they can label God so well, like they've almost spent their whole life. There's some dude on here that keeps posting, and he's constantly trying to criticize faith. And it's almost humorous. I finally sent him back an email and said, hey, listen, when this thing's over, I'll have coffee with you, but please stop. I mean, I take 5 minutes and I rip this guy apart. That wouldn't be the goal. But the level of anger he has, and I think of this man that got healed. He's been healed by this Jesus, and he goes and rats him out. Think of that. Think of that for a second. You've been 38 years lame. This is not a good ending. And this is why the Jews were persecuting Jesus. Oh, here we go. So for John's gospel, they're persecuting, actually for the same other gospels, the other gospels, the synoptic gospels, they end up wanting to kill Jesus because of his cleansing the temple. John wraps it around the Sabbath breaking, but the same point is being made. There is a system of religion that Jesus has undermined, that they hold to for power, and that's why they're going after him. So this is why Jesus is persecuting, Jews were persecuting Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. He was healing on the Sabbath. Can you believe that? When you think about this again, in the cold light of day, it shows how blind religion can make us. It shows how quickly our theological commitments can make us blind to the living God. It's scary, frankly, because I see myself as a religious person. And it reminds me, outside of the essentials, to be gracious with the non-essentials and actually look for new life in people rather than pushing my preconceived notions of what I think God is. And, you know, the older and the more trained I have gotten in theology is, ironically, the less I know. And that's being honest. I have a lot more probably holes because I just looked at it and said, I'm not sure that we can hold tightly to A or B view. And man, And I've met people who hold on to their own Sabbaths to the and can't see the healing in people's lives, and it's sad. It's sad, and I just couldn't be careful myself. And this is why the Jews were persecuting Jesus, because he had done these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, "My Father is working until now, and I am working." There's a theological debate going on in the first century Second Temple whether God rested on Saturday. Now, again, you have to have gone to seminary to understand this, but when you spend all your day thinking about God, you'll end up spinning around on issues that you realize after, when you're in ministry and you're working with true people and the true reality, that a lot of these things are stupid. One of them in the first century was, there was a huge debate amongst the Shamite Pharisees and the Hillite Pharisees around, did God take a break on the Sabbath? And what they meant was, did he actually rest? Did he take it to put his feet up on the seventh day, or was he working? And I believe it was the Hillites who said, well, he had to be working somewhat, or the universe would stop working. You can understand how dumb this is when we hear it in our ears. And trust me, if you listen to some theological debates today, you think the same thing. So let's just be real. And when Jesus says, my Father is always working, he's actually siding with the Hillites. But the truth is, the emphasis of God taking a rest did not mean he stopped working in the creation of the world. It meant that he was done in the created order. And there's my daughter sneaking out downstairs. I'm teaching her, baby.
Oh, sorry, I just need my phone to email Mr. Nelly.
It's upstairs on the island. See, parenting doesn't stop, even with COVID. Anyways, this debate was going on, and Jesus emphasizes the point. You're missing the point. God is working, but when he says, I am always working, oh boy, now we're emphasizing what John's been saying since chapter 1, that the God of creation is here. And I can't tell you how offensive that was to a first century Second Temple Jew. If all the pagans had human gods, like gods that became human, lesser gods, mind you, but one of the ways they knew that they weren't pagans is that they had this emphasis on this reality that the gods never became human. So when Jesus said this, my Father is working until now, and I am, ego eimi, which is, what did they ask the God's name in Exodus? Who are you? I am that I am, right? If you haven't seen the 10 Commandments, I'd recommend it. God has a very deep and heavy voice in that one. And when Jesus says, my Father's working till now, and I am, ego eimi, working, don't misunderstand. They understood exactly what he's saying. He's saying he's the creator God. Like, there's just no other way. And that's why in verse 18 it says, this was why the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him. Like, that is just the ultimate heresy. It is idolatry. It's the thing that would undermine their whole system. And if he wasn't God, as C.S. Lewis said, then he was a lunatic. Okay, so the claims in John's gospel is it's either is or isn't. And there's no in between. All the more to kill him because not only was he breaking the Sabbath. See, what's hilarious is they put Sabbath keeping with claiming you're God, which John's having fun here. They're so retarded, sorry, that they put idolatry alongside of a minor breaking of the Sabbath. But he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal to God. I mean, good Lord. I can't tell you how bad that is. Remember, to them, how bad that is. Now, remember, they have just run into a man who for 38 years has been by a pool. He gets healed. And they're worrying about Sabbath. And Jesus confronts them, and all they can see is his breaking of their theological worldview. Yikes. I think there's a lot we can take from this. So how do you preach this? Well, there's so many levels you can. I'm going to take it on the well. Are we wanting to be well or to be physically better? I wonder if our culture wants to be well, whole, abundant life, Jesus following. Or do we just want to not be sick so we might die so that we can go on living in bitterness and adultery and greed. I think this text preaches so well today. So that's where I'm going to go. I hope you enjoyed this. Please feel free to go back and watch it. If you want to join us on Friday night at 7, I'm hosting a Zoom. Just send me your email. I have all the ones that have already been on it. We had 7 or 8 people. It was really a nice discussion. We'll have a discussion around this. I'll have a couple questions, and I'd love to hear from you. So remember, my email is revem, REVEM, @shaw.ca. All right? Bless you all. I'm going to go and enjoy dinner with my wife. That's why I did this early again, if you missed this. But you can go back and watch the whole thing. And if you want, or if you're having trouble sleeping, just put this on beside you, and I'm sure you'll fall asleep. All right, goodbye.